So sometimes life is full of fortunate accidents. And one of those really fabulous fortunate accidents happened to me this summer in Thunder Bay, Ontario. We were walking around downtown and they were tearing up the streets. And my dad and I were walking and trying to decide where we wanted to go and how we were going to get back to the Viking ship. And lo and behold, I saw a sign that warmed my nerd heart. It said, museum this way. And I looked and I saw the coolest guy who was putting the sign out, and he invited me in. And I spent one of the best hours of my trip hanging out in the Boreal Museum with its owner and operator, Jason Feller. And he has so graciously agreed to come onto the show today and talk about what goes into creating a museum to bring education to everybody. So, Jason, thanks for joining me from Canada.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. What a wonderful accident we had running into each other.
It was so amazing. And you let us come in. I think you guys, it was an off day, and you were in the middle of doing some pretty amazing renovations the day I came in. How are those going? How is the museum? Tell us what made you start the Boreal Museum.
Absolutely. I mean, to start it, I had the idea for the Boreal Museum in 2019, but well before that, I was studying at Lakehead University here in Thunder Bay. I was going through my science degree, and then I focused in on botany. And while I was kind of doing that, I was thinking, oh, I might work for, the local M&R, the Ministry of Natural Resources, or I don't really know what I'm going to do. And then while I was kind of doing my thesis, I started working at the Thunder Bay Museum, which is like a local history museum in town. While I was working there, it kind of changed my whole perspective about what I wanted to do. I started there in collections where I went through like thousands of objects in the Thunder Bay Museum, recataloging things, all that stuff. And I really latched onto that. I thought that was amazing, even though it was kind of a desk job and whatever, and I didn't ever see myself liking something like that. But then because I was a student, I was bouncing around contract to contract, up to the point where I even redid one of the exhibits, the dinosaur exhibit they used to have. They had an Albertosaurus skeleton. But when I was going through the collections, I found hundreds of fossils that were just in boxes stowed away that weren't on display. And I was like, we should put these out. So I just went forward, redid the dinosaur exhibit. And from that moment, it was like blood in the water for me. Like I knew exactly what I wanted to do and it aligned with my passions. Now, the Thunder Bay Museum is focused on like local history, not so much natural history. So I knew if I wanted to do more, I was going to have to do my own thing because we didn't really have anything locally available like that, which is really unfortunate considering how much nature we're surrounded by here. We're just in the
Yes.
middle of nowhere, just surrounded by the Boreal Forest and the Great Lakes. So, um, so what ended up happening is it was during the lockdowns. I was working two different jobs. I was working at the Thunder Bay Museum and I was working at a bookstore, a Canadian bookstore chain called Indigo. And when the lockdowns happened, suddenly I had so much time on my hands that I never had before in my life. And I thought, maybe I'll give it a try. And my partner, Mariano, he really pushed me. He's like, I think you should do it. I think you should do something with this. I think it's a good idea. So I really started going forward with that. And then that led me into doing, I was doing take home science kits during the lockdowns because nobody could go anywhere. I was making pre-packaged science kits that would have like 6 to 8 different science experiments inside of them. And they were all kind of themed seasonally. And I would drop them off door to door. So, families wouldn't kill each other indoors
Right.
being trapped together that long.
I remember the
um,
kits. I did them too.
yeah. And I had enough success with that that I thought I could keep myself afloat without these other jobs. Like I could just keep doing this and put all of my energy into this. So I started doing that full time and I was able to leave both of my jobs and sustain myself on those kits. And then I started doing that summer, it was 2021. I started doing foragers walks. So this is really where my passion lies because I'm a botanist, I'm a big plant nerd. They couldn't keep me inside as a kid. Um, So I started doing guided walking tours where I go out with groups and we identify wild foods that grow absolutely everywhere around us. And those really were a hit. I think I'd like to think I've started to create a little subculture of foragers in Thunder Bay because I've been doing it every summer now for the past, 3 years. And there's lots of foragers around now, it's fantastic to see people connect with nature like that. And then so I had the kits and I was doing the foragers walks and I was sustaining myself enough that I thought I might be able to get a physical space and I might be able to unload some of the stuff in my house somewhere else. Maybe even like if it didn't work out so well, at least I'd have an office space to kind of take away some of the mess in my
Sure.
house because my whole house was just science kits at that point. Um, and I started doing it was 1,000 square feet. It was on the far side of town from where I am now. And it was kind of crammed in a shoebox, but I started doing mini exhibits in that space. So I was really generously donated like a polar bear cub and a couple of things from Arctic animals and this whole display that I kind of redid and repurposed to talk about Arctic animals and kind of like the melting ice sheets and kind of how that affects communities and things like that. Um,
And just to
and
clarify
it
for
was,
our listeners, it's a taxidermied polar bear cub.
oh
It's
yeah.
not a real live polar bear cub.
No, no, I definitely don't have the means for that. No, yeah, it's a really old taxidermied polar bear cub that was really generously donated to me and well, to the Boreal Museum. And I had success with that. And I ended up buying a Deinonychus skeleton. So it's a 9.5 foot long raptor replica skeleton that I got. And so then I did a mini exhibit about dinosaurs in my space. And to this day now, that was years ago that I started that, but to this day, I can't escape talking about dinosaurs. We're stuck on dinosaurs forever now.
I understand. Once you go down the dinosaur path, you never leave it.
There's no going back. Luckily for me, I lived my whole life as a bit of a hoarder. As you can see behind me, this is my home office. So you can see me even having a physical space hasn't helped much. Um,
I understand. You can see the books behind me, and it's the same thing. My science kits are downstairs, but yes.
yeah, yeah, they're in here somewhere. Um, so I had that small space and I had a lot of schools and community groups reaching out to me wanting to do programs with me. And I was trapped in like 1,000 square feet. And it was kind of like a cooperative situation. So I couldn't control my hours or anything. So I saw this really great opportunity to move downtown Port Arthur and Thunder Bay. In a space that it's been neglected for about 20 years. So we went in there. It was an old mall that was kind of cut off. And we've been painting the whole mall for the past year, kind of bringing it back to life because it was a bit of a frightening liminal space. And then me and my sister-in-law, who runs Quirky Company, we want to make it as immersive as possible. Like it's got to be as fun as possible for us. So we started making like a mushroom garden in a defunct fountain that no longer could hold water. So it's all these giant sculptural mushrooms that Laura from Quirky Company made. We've been painting murals on the wall. In fact, right now we have a muralist in painting the upper hallways. So
Oh,
it's really exciting to see.
amazing.
Yeah, it's really exciting to see the changes in the mall. It's like a anthropomorphized bear with like binoculars and a backpack looking out across a sleeping giant. There's like geese flying. It's stunning what
It
she's
sounds
doing.
perfect for you.
Absolutely. And we have about just shy of 4,000 square feet that we've been getting ready. Um, like when Diane stumbled across our shop, the street was under construction and they actually popped a water line through our whole space because they cut off water to the building. So we weren't able to work on exhibits for a really long time while that was happening. But we're back at it now. So I'm working on a geology exhibit. Of course, I'm bringing back my Deinonychus skeleton. He's waiting for his home in his exhibit. I even have fossil dinosaur eggs as part of that collection. Arctic animals is going to be there as well. And then I'm going to have a temporary classroom space that's going to be expanding in kind of our next stage of opening. So we're going to have a ton of ways to engage people into what I do and everything like that. And I'll actually be able to have schools visit me, which is really exciting.
That is just
Right now,
amazing.
we're aiming for hopefully November. Everybody, please keep your fingers crossed for us about that deadline for the exhibits to be all ready for everybody to come see us.
Well, and you kind of touched a little bit on where I was going to start is you were starting from scratch. And so where did you get all of the things? You talked about the taxidermied polar bear cub, but all of these other things that you're putting on display. And I noticed when I was there, even in the little space I saw, you managed not just with the fossils, but you had a hands-on component to everything as well. What sort of goes into the process of deciding what you have, what you're going to create, and how you're going to present it to families?
Uh, it Planning and thinking about what I'm gonna make definitely takes the longest time. It just way outbeats how long it actually takes to make something, because it's really important for me that everything is super hands-on. For me, especially in school, like I'm pretty dyslexic, and so I really struggled in a formal way of teaching. Read this, copy that, read this, copy that. That does not work for me
Right.
at all. I really excel when it's hands-on material, when it's something I can touch and interact with and I can make it do the thing or, perform the concept that they're trying to give to me. So for me, uh, I'm always building the exhibits kind of around a storyline. So I'm trying to follow kind of a pathway that makes the most sense. So that way it's going to bridge the most connections. Um, and on each of kind of like the key points of it, or, ways that make it really easy, I always want to have an interactive element that you actually touch and you hold a piece and you look at it under a microscope to see it up close, or you are assembling a puzzle or any way like that, or you're touching the actual polar bear fur as you learn about how polar bears keep warm, things like that. It's so critical for me to have everything hands on. A lot of my collections and things have kind of just followed me around through my life. Like I said, I've lived my life as a bit of a goblin. So I've always been out in nature hoarding things, even as a kid. Um, One of my formative experiences, I guess, as a young kid in the Thunder Bay area in the public school system, we'd go out to a place called Kingfisher, which was like a bunch of cabins out by a lake. And as kids, we would spend like overnight in these cabins and we'd go on nature walks and things like that. And one of the things that we did out there was dissected owl pellets. And so I would have been in grade 7. So how old would I have been then? Like 10, 11,
Okay.
12,
Yeah. Sounds
somewhere
about
around
right.
there. Yeah. And so when I was taking apart the owl pellet, by this time they already couldn't keep me inside. So it was already like a lost adventure. But in the owl pellet, I got a mouse skull inside of it. And it was like, this is the coolest thing. And I got to take it home with me. And I carried that little mouse skull with me like the whole rest of that trip. And I brought it home with me. And really it was just a landslide from there that I was like kind of starting to hoard natural history objects in a
You
way.
still have the skull?
I don't think so. I might have it in a memory trunk in my parents' attic, locked away for, 20 plus
Right.
years. Maybe it's hidden away somewhere. But I've definitely got a lot bigger skulls now. So, but
What are some of the favorite skulls that you have?
well, my favorite for talking to people about is actually, so I have the polar bear skull that was generously donated to me, but I also have a black bear skull. Because when you look at the polar bear skull, even though it's an adult male skull, it doesn't look that big. It's like, I think about 14 inches long. And then, so it's like, well, this is actually a huge animal, but it doesn't seem like that big of a skull. But then I bring out the black bear skull, and it's like, and this was like the biggest black bear you're ever going to see kind of skull. So it's
Right.
like you can really see the difference of how much meat and fur and muscle attaches to that skull to make that animal the size that it is. So I really love those two skulls. Plus, they're the biggest skulls I have aside from my dinosaur skull.
Sure. And let's talk a little bit because you've talked about a boreal forest. If somebody has never been to a boreal forest, what is that?
So Boreal Forest, I mean, holds a special place in my heart. Technically, where I live, I am like a crossroads between like like a St. Lawrence, Great Lakes kind of ecosystem in a boreal forest. So it's a bit of a crossover here. So we get some things you don't normally see. But the boreal forest is mostly defined by the trees within it. And that's kind of how many forests are described. So the trees within the boreal forest are heavily reliant on conifer trees. Spruce trees, fir trees, pine trees make up the bulk of it because they're really well equipped to sometimes the very harsh winters of the boreal forest. They're able to survive those things. And so the boreal forest is really defined by its community of trees, really. And then there's kind of like the mirroring forest. So in our forest, our boreal forest, we are largely white spruce, black spruce, balsam fir, and then we have like our northern white cedar. But our mirror kind of habitat would be like the taiga forest, which is spans across Europe and Russia, which is almost the same as the boreal forest. It's just different species of conifer trees that make it up, but they all kind of fill the same niches and perform the same functions. But as growing up in the boreal forest, it's really, really special to me. And I think there's no other kind of habitat on Earth that has kind of the once you enter springtime in the boreal forest and summertime in the boreal forest, the amount of time that things have to flush and flower and do their thing is so rapid. It's just this crazy cacophony of life that springs into action in our summers.
Right. Well, you've got a very limited growing period, and so they have to take full advantage of it.
Yeah, absolutely. They've got like 2 months, to really get the bulk of their work done for, the animals got to bulk up, the plants got to make their fruits and flowers and seeds, and everything kind of has to happen in such a short window. So it's just this absolute explosion of life just through the summer months. And then I mean, for us, it's a good season from like May to maybe October if we're really lucky. I don't think we're going to be lucky this year, but last year, well into October, things were still growing. But typically, you just got like June to August in our area where things got to get their stuff done before the first frosts come.
And so, what animals and birds call the boreal forest home?
Ooh, well, we are we get moose, white-tailed deer. Really common is the deer, especially in the city here because people feed them. So they just encroach on the city like crazy. If you're really lucky, you can spot lynx in our area. So those are like, and bobcats as well. The lynx have the little tufts on their ears, probably one of my favorite animals. Um, Plus we have, lots of squirrels and rodents, all those kind of guys who are ripping apart those pine cones like crazy right now. Um, and birds, we have a lot of uh we have a lot of woodpeckers, we have blue jays, we have black-capped chickadees are very nostalgic for a lot of people. They're very iconic call. Um we have a few juncos. Honestly, I'm not very good at birds, but I wish I was better at the people who are very passionate about them and can just like, oh, that's that bird and that's that bird. I always find just so incredible. And I'm like, oh,
Well, and I find I learn by experiencing. And so I have a
yeah.
feeling that as you're expanding your exhibits, you may end up experiencing a whole lot more of birds.
Oh, absolutely. And we have in our area too, like we have some bird migration outpost places like the Thunder Cape Bird Observatory. It's like on the very foot of the sleeping giant because it ends up being this natural channel. If you guys don't know, the sleeping giant is like a rock isle formation in Thunder Bay. It's very iconic. You can Google the images and you can see it from the Thunder Bay City. You can see it even in my logo there. That's the sleeping giant kind of profile there that you'd see from the Thunder Bay Harbor.
Yep.
On the very tip of it, birds kind of get stuck there when they're migrating because they think that they're continuing south. And so there's an observatory there. I actually overnighted there once, helping the bird observatory, and we saw like saw-whet owls migrating and a bunch of birds.
Cool.
So it's a really incredible place to come see birds, especially if you're coming during the times of migration, because we're like a total throwaway for these birds trying to get somewhere warmer.
Makes total sense to me. And I'm just so caught up by your passion and your love of the natural world. You had talked a little bit about sort of wanting to create access. and feeling a need for people to have access to science education and to the world around. Can you address that a little bit in terms of the needs you see and how you're helping to sort of fill those needs?
Yeah, absolutely. And that it ties in a lot with the access and the hands-on things that I do with my exhibits that really change it. But so even when we were looking for a new space, it was so important to me that it was like physically even accessible to people. So we have an elevator in our space and we have flat to the ground accessible doors, like there's no ramp. I have to save up money to get the electric buttons on the doors. We don't have those unfortunately yet, because those are quite pricey. But it's so important for me to make science as accessible as possible because I really want to build the empire that I wish was around when I was a kid. When I was growing up in Thunder Bay, there's a large nonprofit. It's mostly based out of Sudbury, which is about 8 hours from here, uh, called Science North. So they have a pretty big museum in Sudbury, and they had outposts here, and they had one for a really short while when I was a kid. And that was kind of like it locked in my mind as being able to go in and touch and interact with science concepts and things like that. But then they were here and they were gone, like a flash in the pan. And I really missed that. I thought that was incredible. Um, so for me, it was really important to make a space that's accessible to science, and I'm trying to reach as many audiences as possible. That being said, going forward too, even in my exhibits, I'm looking for people right now kind of to help me translate things into other languages so it can even cross language barriers and things like that. Uh, so as I'm building my exhibits right now and getting into the meat of it, I'm kind of addressing even the panel sizes I have, but I also want to incorporate um, I'm looking into even making it so you can put on headphones and you can listen to the content versus having to read it as well to kind of help change that as well. So it's really important for me to see how many barriers I can cross to be able to get science into people's hands in any way that I can. And like with the birds, I am not an expert in most things, especially like exhibits that I'm working on, like my geology exhibit, or like the Arctic animals exhibit. That one I'm a little more confident, but geology exhibit, I need a lot of help on. I talk to a lot of people who are way more professional and way more studied in that topic than me to be able to build my exhibits in a way that makes sense, but is also going to be able to bridge connections for people. So in my geology exhibit coming up, we kind of start from the basics, like what is a rock, what is a mineral, and then you get to like touch and sort those kinds of things to see what defines those two things, and then you get to talk about the mineral test before we move into things like tectonic activity. Even we talk about in there, and there's even a puzzle of Pangea where you can actually move the pieces and rebuild Pangea or try and make it fit the modern world and things like that. Um, so yeah, accessibility is absolute key for me, and not only just in terms of physical accessibility, but language accessibility and in like different learning experiences accessibility, for being able to bridge gaps for people with learning disabilities as well, is really important. So I'm always trying to find new ways to make topics being able to meet people and their needs and how they kind of consume information.
I love all of that. And so, question for you, if you could wave a magic wand and have everything you wanted come true in 10 years, what would it look like?
Oh my goodness. It would probably be massive for one. Physically massive. Um, a lot of people are really excited about the dinosaur exhibit, and so I would want to get replicas of many different dinosaurs and expand that whole collection because I have things like fossil dinosaur eggs part of my collection, and I have, small pieces of bones and things like that. But, sometimes people really need the big wow effect of some of our bigger
Sure.
dinosaurs. I'd also want to expand and kind of have like a host of outreach teams that would be able to actually go into the smaller communities and provide education and things like that. Um, I mean, for me, I feel like the opportunities are endless to expand just because I really love all aspects of science and I'm not an expert at it, but if I had a magic wand, at least have a team of experts at everything so I could kind of cover everything at once.
Well, and that's the joy of
Um,
doing what you do is you're able to take that passion and that curiosity that so clearly comes through and apply it to learning about new things and figuring out, how do I teach this to other people in a way that they're going to get it and find that same passion and buy in. And so I think that's an awesome calling.
It's it's definitely a journey. I don't know of many people who started a museum in the past 80 years, so there's not really like a playbook to what I'm doing either. I feel like most of the time I'm just making it up as I go. But I'm definitely extremely passionate about it, which is good because it's not easy to do. It's pretty tough to it's a challenge to come up with all of these things without knowing what you're doing. So I spent a lot of time like my mom's she's a retired teacher now, but she just retired 2 years ago, I guess now. Um so I've grown up with teachers around me my whole life. So that helps a great deal. And my mother has like a huge passion for geography and things like that. So and we were very encouraged, me and my siblings, to grow up and kind of lean into our passions as much as possible. Um, so it really built that passion and that's yeah, really in the lockdowns, it changed kind of how I was thinking about the world and how I could interact with the world, and it kind of made me feel like I could move from a backseat position to more of a front seat position to kind of do what I wanted to do instead of just, doing what's already here, you know? So building things from scratch suddenly seemed way more in my hands. And like I said, even in the first lockdown, my partner Mariano, he pushed me to start doing stuff with this idea I had, and he's been alongside every step of the way. That poor man is in there carving exhibits out of foam and whatever crazy idea I have, he's sort of locked into. So he's there every step of the way, and of course my family's dragged along on this whole journey as well. So it's really kind of a community and family experience in a big way as well because it's a lot to do, and without a guidebook, we're all just kind of plodding along, figuring it out.
Well, and they say nobody's an island. And I think that that's very true. It really does take a collective of people to build our dreams. If people would like to follow you, follow the Boreal Museum, how do they reach you?
So you can find the Boreal Museum. You can go to our website, of course, borealmuseum.com. It's going to be going through a bit of a redo soon because it's a little bit outdated. But usually some of the quick, fast updates you can find through there, especially when it comes to our events and things like that, like the foragers walks. We even do the haunted Lakehead walks. So that is like some of the true horrible ghost and gut stories of Thunder Bay's downtown. Um, you can also find us on Facebook as Boreal Museum or Instagram as Boreal Museum. That's kind of where I'm most active. I've tried a couple other places, but I'm so harebrained that I kind of forget about my other outlets.
Understood.
Um, yeah, very sometimes, very few and far between, I'll release like a YouTube video. Usually that's about some of the science kits that we do, and kind of the concept around how they work and how they kind of function in our science shop. And if you can find a lot of these things on our store, but like I said, we'll be kind of redoing our store and bringing a lot of things in a big way. I personally make in-house a lot of different small experiment kits as well as some larger ones, things like that. And those kinds of the kits, especially the small ones, I'm kind of always trying to rotate them and get new ones in all the time so people can keep coming back and learning new things. And then you can also find me if you live in Thunder Bay or if you're traveling to Thunder Bay. We are at 215 Red River Road. We're downtown Port Arthur in Thunder Bay. We are inside of a building called Keskus Court. So you can always come stop by, say hi, come meet my polar bear cub there. And then hopefully by the time you guys are visiting, my exhibits will be up and you'll be able to say hi to my dinosaur as well, and come learn some fun stuff at the Boreal Museum.
And I'll post some pictures from my own visit in the stories because you were kind enough to let me take pictures and we posed together. So I'll make sure people are able to see that. But seriously, don't do it as an accidental visit the way I did it. Plan a real visit to Thunder Bay and make the Boreal Museum your number one stop. It's definitely worth it. So,
Thank you so much.
Jason, very last question of the day. What currently brings you joy or hope?
Ooh, what brings me joy or hope? Well, Right now, because the exhibits are pushing forward and now I'm like really going into it, it's really that I'm holding on to that November timeline. That's bringing me a lot of joy to be able to making the exhibits is one of my favorite things I get to do. And so because we're making an entire museum's worth of exhibits right now, there's lots to be done where I normally don't get to do that stuff very often. I'm sure I'll have rotating exhibits that I get to work on slowly. But right now, it's one of my favorite things is, all of the Imagineering that goes into how to make a space immersive because I really try to make things immersive. So like the geology exhibit, you walk through like a big cave entrance, go
Fun.
into it, you're going to sit in a little bat cave and I'll talk about cave structures and things like that. So all of that Imagineering, that brings me a lot of joy to come up with these, totally crazy ideas and then my family and my partner has to be like, well, that's not possible, but we can do this side thing. And so I get to see, my imagination kind of come to life. And that is such a joyful experience for me. Um, another thing, wow, another thing that brings me joy, actually, this has been happening a lot lately because I've been doing this for a couple years now. And so now I've had some kids who came into the Boreal Museum when I was on the other side of town very young, and now they're starting to get older and they remember me and they want to come into the museum and talk to me specifically. And that is an
That's
absolute thrill to me
awesome.
because it's really heartwarming to see my little love letter to science being able to reach kids like that and to be part of their formative science exploration journey. So brings
Absolutely.
me huge joy when that happens.
I love that. And I love the fact that them wanting to come and talk to you is a love letter back. And that's one
Yeah.
of the highest compliments you can be paid. Well,
Yeah.
Jason, thank you so much for being on the Adventures in Learning podcast. It has been such a treat to catch up with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been so nice getting to talk to you again.